All right, welcome in. Today we are talking spring gobbler for dummies. There's a lot of people out there, me included, that are really new at turkey hunting, and you always hear guys talk about spring gobblers like the biggest thrill you can have. So we want to take some time and kind of do a walkthrough for anyone that's considering turkey hunting or is relatively new to it to kind of get a little more knowledge and better understanding of what they should be looking for before they head out in the woods. So Justin, what's the best thing to start with? I guess would probably be your gun setup. What's your typical gun setup when you're heading out to spring turkey woods?
Mine, gun set out a 12 gauge pump gun. It's a Winchester 1300. It's called Black Shadow. I shoot 3 inch. A lot of guys shoot 3.5 inch magnums. I guess the most important thing about any gun that you choose, whether it's 12 gauge or 20 gauge, depending on your size or age, is you pattern your gun. You got to take it. They sell those
Mhm.
targets with the turkey heads on them. You take them out. You take 20 yards, 30 yards, 40 yards, whatever you're comfortable shooting out to. You can try to push it as far as you want. If you're going to be in an open field, but you need to pattern these guns in the loads you're going to use because some loads just don't work well with certain guns. So it's just very dependent on your personal weapon. The weapon that you have. My suggestion is to start, with 3 inch. Um, and you can shoot, 2 or 3 quarters, but it's just 3 inches probably what I would recommend. At least 3 inch. I mean, some guys swear by 3.5. They make some really expensive turkey loads. Very specific to the sport. Some you have to order. You can't really find them in many stores. You can get that far. When you get into the sport a little more and you want to reach out to 80 yards or so, that's the kind of, technology and price you go to. But as
Sure.
far as that, pick a couple loads up at Walmart, a couple different brands of turkey loads, and get some targets. And all you can shoot is 20 yards, shoot at 30 or shoot at 40 yards, and see how your spread is around that turkey head. Now, you want full to extra full. Extra full is the traditional turkey choke. Full work as well. But I mean, extra full is that the pattern spreads out further because their heads are very vulnerable. So essentially, you just need one or two babies make contact with the head, but their bodies aren't. Their bodies are super tough. Like they will absorb a full 3 inch shot. I've seen it them flying in the fall, take a whole 3.5 inch magnum just to the side, just keep on trucking. They
The
just don't
tough birds.
penetrate deep enough. Yeah, they are really tough. I mean, I've knocked them right out of the air in the fall, and they got up and just took off. So I mean, that covers your gun. You just in the spring, you can only use shotgun. Fall guys used to have the over unders with the shotgun rifle. That was kind of cool. I always enjoyed
Sure.
that. 'Cause at the longer distance, if you want to pick one off, you can pick one off. But in spring, it's all about the calling and closing the distance to get that nice headshot. So yeah, shotgun, but pattern your gun. Yeah, you can't just go out there willy nilly. I mean, you can try different size loads, whatever you're comfortable with. 3.5s kick pretty hard, but I mean, most adults can handle it with good form.
Yeah, so it's just
Um,
trial and error basically to see what's best fit for you.
yeah, yeah. Well, best fit for the gun that you have. I mean, everybody's
Hmm.
price point's different. I mean, honestly, the turkey gun I have, I won it, years and years ago. Otherwise, I don't know what kind of turkey gun I would have purchased. It's not cheap and it's very
Oh
specialized. It's
no.
one season. Yeah, because I don't hunt with pumps otherwise. You can't really. I guess you can get a different barrel setup maybe, and use it for something else, slug hunting or upland bird hunting. But usually turkey's a little bit shorter, barrel a little bit more maneuverable, with a heavier choke instead of a modified like you would use for grouse or pheasant, with a
Sure.
tighter pattern, shorter distance. Um, I think that pretty much finished it up on your weapons setup. You just try it out before you go out. That's all. That's all. Know which distance you can shoot, how far you can shoot comfortably, and still have a nice pattern and have a good kill zone. On those, you don't have to. You just buy a paper target and draw something, just size of a turkey head,
Hmm.
like a water bottle. You can put a water bottle out there. That'd be a perfect thing. If you're peppering a water bottle at 30 yards and it's just full of babies, that's a dead turkey.
You're good to go.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
So I guess the next step would be your gear set up. I know a lot of people, me included, get intimidated by diaphragm calls. I mean, you just put them in
Mm,
your mouth. It's a lot of gagging first few times, and they're hard to learn. At least for me,
yeah.
they are. So I know box calls are relatively easy for the beginners like myself. And what would you recommend to anyone trying to pick up a
Uh,
call?
don't be afraid of slate calls. Slate calls are great, especially purring. They're very easy to learn how to purr and putt, and even simple yelps. It's just about the shape that you do on the box call. The mistake a lot of people make about box calls is just scratching the whole thing the hell up. What you want to do is like a
Hmm.
small section in one direction. Just a little tiny square in the corner. Pick your kind of sweet spot. But then there's different calls you can learn, and the internet's great. We could do another video sometime about you do a little J, and that the shape and the pressure creates the call. But they're pretty easy to pick up. Now, in a few weeks' time practicing, you can be pretty proficient with a slate call. Problem is it doesn't carry. I use slate a lot of times for hung up birds, like stuff I can't do as well with a mouth call. And a mouth call I'm always using because I can go loud to soft. So usually I start soft, go louder. But you can also do that with a box call. If you're trying to locate or you're trying to get a shock gobble, you sometimes are more aggressive. And, it's a risk because sometimes being too aggressive. I always start quietly, so that's why I would recommend slate calls are relatively easy to learn. At least a few good notes and a
Hmm.
few good sequences you can learn. And I think they're great for close quarters. The only problem is when you get too close. I usually switch to a mouth call or just my mouth because the lack of your movement. You got to set up for your shot unless you're calling for somebody else shooting.
Yeah, you want to be hands free.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, it's a very hard, but that's when there's push button calls, there's pull buttons. They used to have ones that attach the fore grip of your shotgun, and you can pull a string as you're in shooting position just to get a little yelp or just enough to lift their head. That's what a lot of guys do, a little pop in it, so the turkey picks up his head so you get a clean
Hmm.
shot, or just something to close that distance or get him to look towards your decoy. So I guess don't be afraid of. I mean, there's lots of different push button calls. There's some twist calls. I got a per twist call that I haven't used very much because I do that on the slate, which is just more readily available for me because I always carry the slates. That some of the calls are a little big to carry around, but it's just nice to have a tackle box of calls. I have push button calls and I have that per call is more of a twist style call. I do always carry a box call on me. And sometimes the raspy box call really gets them going. They're used to hearing diaphragms because every Tom, Dick, and Harry's out there just hammering on a diaphragm call. So a lot of
Yeah.
times just something new gets them excited or it sounds different. You really got to try it out. The problem is as you experiment, you also oversaturate with calls and create that, fear of calls. That's why they say try not to call spring scouting because, you're making them call shy or wise to your call at least.
Hmm.
They go looking and nothing's there, or they hear a truck or whatever, then they associate it with. So it's better to use crow call, owl call, I mean, when they're hot, they're hot. I've got on my truck, shut the door, they've gobbled. In the evening time, in the morning, if it's still dark and they're in the tree, there's not much you can do. I've heard them gobble at ambulances going by. You know, anything you can think of, they will gobble at when they're in the tree and they feel safe. So I guess that's a good transition. The next is don't call as much. Calling more never helps you. Like you just out there just hammering calls is never going to work for you. Less is more. I think that's the good transition is it's more important to scout turkeys, scout very hard. I mean, find multiple locations with turkeys, use your owl call at night. It's one of my favorite times of year because I love driving around. The
Yep.
weather's
Back
nice.
roads.
Hit the back roads. I just drive my truck and I stop every so often. I hit the owl call, I hit the crow call, and I have been guilty occasionally to hit, you know, high pitched box call or a high pitched mouth call just to really do something aggressive if I feel like turkeys are in the area, but I can't get them to respond to anything else. I mean, you need to do it within the last hour of daylight, so it makes it a little tough because you want to cover a lot of ground, but you don't have that much time. You got about an hour, hour and a half, because that's when they really start to get up in the trees. And I mean, you can still go in the dark. And the other thing is, you got to get out super early. Like, you got to be out 4 a.m., 5 a.m. If you really know you're having birds, you got to get out there and get set up in the dark.
I guess that
Yeah.
leads to my next question is where do you typically scout for birds? Are you looking for food sources? Are you looking for roosting locations? What are you looking for?
In northwestern PA, kind of where we grew up, I look for steep slopes with grapevine. Yeah,
Hmm.
for some reason, I learned at a young age, deer hunting, turkeys were always hanging out on steep slopes with grapevine, and you get to know certain areas. But I believe the reason is food source because grapes, and
Easy
also
food, yeah.
an easy escape. Because if you're on a steep hillside and the turkeys are feeding across any threat, they just glide off the hill
Oh
and
yeah.
they're gone. Like any kind of predators, you're talking coyotes, foxes, bobcats, anything like that. If they feel a threat, they can eat. They're too fat to get uphill, so they gotta fly. They glide better downhill, so they can glide, gone downhill. Uphill, they can't get that far away, and so I think that's the number one place I look. Now here in Central PA, we don't have as much grapevine. I mean, it's still there, and grapevine's a big one for me in Pennsylvania. I really look for grapevine, but I also the edge of clear cuts. They really frequent the edge of clear cuts during roosting time because you can see a long distance up in the tree. You can see predators, and you can see mates and females. You can see other turkeys coming, and humans coming in and out for that matter. So,
Hmm.
edge of clear cuts, how the PA clear cuts are. Some are just huge. They're just span for,
Acres and
miles.
acres.
Yeah,
Yep.
yeah. So, I mean, they can really see, so it makes it difficult approach. But when scouting, I definitely call out around clear cuts. Any tall timber and clear cuts. I mean, yeah, you look for food sources like acorns, but like this year, mild winter, good acorn crop last year. So, I mean, that crap's everywhere.
Oh
Uh,
yeah.
yeah, and cornfields are a biggie, but they're saying this year that the winter was so mild that they've been eating, they didn't really need the crops to be out there. They had food everywhere because the snow didn't cover everything up and kill everything off. So they really weren't scavenging out in farm fields as much. At least that's what they say. I mean, you always still see them out there because corn's got to be one of their, you know, delicacies, I guess you would say.
So
But
that's,
I
oh, go
would go with
ahead.
what's available. I would go with what's available. If you're more standing timber, look for clear cuts and openings. They do like steep hillsides. If you can find grapevine, great. I mean, grapevine or thickets, briar patches, that's usually the kind of shit they're hanging around. But you got to have some sort
Hmm.
of elevation where they can roost and see. They're never going to roost in the bottom. I almost very rarely they're not going to roost in the bottom of a hill. They like to be on the side of a hill or at least up towards the top. I mean, they might move through the area. It's just I think it has to do with predators. They're vulnerable. The lower they are, the bottom they are, they can't get up and out. They got to run. They really want to stay at a vantage point.
Yeah,
Percentage.
circling back to mention the owl call and the crow call to kind of roost one at night. Say you get one to respond and you manage to roost them right at sunset. What's the plan of attack for getting back in there the next morning and setting up on them?
Say early. I mean, oh, shoot, what's it? It's what daylight by 6:30 now.
Hmm.
Probably 6:15 is peak in daylight. So I mean, I would be probably out there by 5. I'd want to be parking my truck and getting in there because they're gonna start waking up. I mean, depending on how far you are from your truck, like you said, you might shut in your door, hear them gobble. Now, and by all means, that's not gonna scare them. Like they just feel very secure in the tree and will gobble and very aggressive. They're very aggressive with calls in the tree. So anything that seems to be a threat, it's kind of funny because old neighbor used to have a peacock and they would gobble at that peacock like crazy. It was another bird, but
Oh
when the
yeah.
screech, they're very territorial and any loud. high pitched noise, they're gonna fire back at. That's why crow calls and owl calls, it's like a big fuck you back to them. Like I'm the big dominant guy. Come get some. But I guess you could use a goblin tube too. I know some people that do that, and then you wouldn't be in so much danger of making them call shy, at least of a hen calls, because you want to call them in mostly with a hen call, not a gobble, but you could probably get them to gobble back at you. They call it shock gobbling, which is, you just spark their rage to call back at you. So real high pitched squeals people do with mouth calls, like real aggressive owl hoots or crow calls, but also, get a gobble tube and gobble at them because that would be a decent tool that I don't really use, but I'm also not going to go out and try to gobble one in because in our area, we don't have a bunch of dominant gobblers that are competing. If we were in the Midwest, maybe, and there was a bunch of dominant gobblers competing, the gobble call would come in a little more handy. Here, you're just lucky to not being called in, a year and a half year old, most likely probably a 2 to 3 year old bird you're calling. That's when you're new to the sport, you're happy with that, right? You can get
Certainly.
a nice 6, 8 inch beard. Now, the more experience you get into it and the more you call birds in, which is I'm way out of that just because I haven't been out there as much as I normally used to, is you call in birds and you're like, that's not the one for me, so you let them go and you just keep going. And guys swear they can hear it by the pitch and stuff, but I don't believe that as much because it's just they can change their tone just like humans can. So if it's just a real high pitch, real aggressive gobbles, it tends to be a Jake because usually the older ones are a little more timid and they hold up and kind of make you do the extra.
So I
Which,
guess my next question would be is if you have one and he's kind of henned up and just not responding to you and say he's hung up to like 100 yards or so,
yeah,
what do you do from there?
I mean, if he's henned up, you're pretty fucked. Because I've had that happen where I'm calling him in and an actual hen comes in. Sometimes they'll
Mhm.
call their way in, and sometimes just you can see the bird, and then you see the hen, and then they just disappear, and you're kind of screwed because they're gonna go do their thing, mate, and then probably not gonna. I mean, you could stay there and see if he comes back in an hour or two and he's ready to remate, but now that hen's already been mated, but that's a long game and low percentage chance. Now, however, if you are competing with a hen or you do see a hen coming, you got to close the gap. And you can't just sit there and say, come to me, big boy. Like you have to say, I'm interested. So you got to close that gap, whether you have to crawl or, just, I mean, I know a lot of guys just hands and knees, crawl. They're down
Mhm.
there crawling and they drag their decoy with them, their hen decoy. And otherwise, you can just sneak through. If you got enough brush, you can, as long as you're not aggressive and you're a little slow, methodical moving, they're looking to see other turkeys. So you're not going to spook them. If you're full sprint, like you're going to spook them. And
Naturally, yeah.
you don't have to really worry about making noise crunchy wise like deer do. Like you can make some noise. It's just whether they pick you up as a threat or not when they see you. But you gotta, I mean, thing about turkeys, you're never gonna call them in from like a half a mile. Guys get so excited and they'll just get out of their truck from the road and they're just gobbling and gobbling and gobbling. And they're like, well, daylight came and it never came. Well, that's because he got out of the tree and he's not gonna gobble anymore. And almost every time when they fly out of a tree, they fly away from where you're calling because they fly to safety and then work their way most likely silently back up. I mean, there are times you just get lucky and the mood's right and whatever, the moon, the temperature, everything lines up, and that sucker just gobbles his head off the whole way in. Most
That's got to
likely,
be a
that's
huge
also,
adrenaline rush, I would
yeah,
think.
it is super cool. Most likely, it's a younger bird. Not always. I mean, most of the time I get excited and I'm like, it's probably a young Jake or something. Not always. It's been the case, but a lot of times. But most of the time they fly away. They'll gobble once or twice and then they get real silent and move in real slow and they use their little bird eyes to look for any kind of movement. That's why, the face mask, the face paint, gloves. Sometimes I even take a camo blanket, you know, I lay it over me. That way, if I adjust or something, I get a little more leeway as far as
Hmm.
you really have to hug yourself into a tree. The more that you can break up your outline, the better. I lay real low. I suck my body down in because that way I can, and I usually set calls or anything I think I'm going to need for that last minute around me or under that blanket. So, like, I always have the mouth call in, but if I need like the slate, everything's very close. So I'm not digging in pockets, when they're coming in because they hit the ground. I mean, that's go time. You have to be super still and then don't call more. Like that's the biggest mistake everybody makes because you want they were just gobbling their head off at everything you threw at them. You could make the worst call. Like I've messed up calls and they just whoa back, just hammer double gobbling back. They do not care when they're in the tree, but when they're on the ground, they're going to be picky and selective, and they're not going to. Sometimes you can get them a shot gobble being really aggressive, but all I think that makes them do in the long run is hold up and say, "Hey, I'm suspicious. You come to me now."
Yep.
Yeah. So what I'd say is you try to close the gap as close to 100 yards as you can get it. 200 yards works, but honestly, the more you can close that gap without being seen, the better. If you have the vegetation, and the tree cover to do it, you got to try to stay uphill of them. You can come across hill, but never try to go below them. I mean, most of the time when I've had gobblers, unfortunately, I've had to go way out and around just to get above them. Waste full good 45 minutes just to safely get around and restart the whole call setup because they don't like to come down because they can't fly uphill away from danger. They
Sure.
want to fly downhill away from danger, so they will easily run uphill. I mean, knock on wood, I've had a very nice gobbler, one of the best I have, glide down into me over a creek, which the, all the old timers tell you they will not cross the water and they won't come downhill. So sometimes you just get hella lucky. And I mean, we were actually walking our way down to cross the water because we knew it was there and to get at least a little closer to it, and the thing flew straight into us. I
Can
mean,
ask for a better setup.
yeah, you just got, and it was just like a firing squad from there because his beard's dangling, and he's literally he was about to land on us. So it was a cool experience, but that's not always the case.
Yeah. Few and far
So I
between, I
think,
would imagine.
yeah, so I think it's less about calls. Call less, less is more. Learn very simple calls. Learn your yelps, your clucks. Try to learn a little bit of purring. You don't need very heavy sequences. Less is more. You're better off getting good camoed up. Be careful out there. People are a little wild. So orange doesn't hurt. Wear your orange straps on your flag or whatever on your back when you're moving around. I've never had an orange that I think spooked a turkey. I'm not out there looking like a pumpkin, but your little squares will help you, from guys because people are terrible in spring gobbler. They really stalk calls and gobbles, so you got to be careful.
Especially when you got
But
decoy out in front too, I'd imagine.
yeah, but I mean, get a good hen decoy. Stay away from anything full strut or anything big gobbler decoy because that's intimidating to younger birds. You can have like a half strut or a small jake, but I just recommend starting with a hen decoy. You know, your basic setup is going to be, get your shotgun, get a pattern with the right shells, get you a turkey vest, a head net, hat, gloves. Get your skin covered as much as you can, or a little bit of face paint. That stuff's pretty cheap. Walmart always carries the face paint wheels for turkey or for bow hunters too.
Yep.
And then get yourself a slate call, a couple different strike. Usually a wood and some kind of synthetic plastic striker. As long as you have two or three, you get different sounds with the different strikers. But getting a wood and a plastic, there are different kinds of slates, glass, but there's a lot of more friendly ones. Some are triples. You have three different materials on, one slate call. That's great because you can experiment in different tones and sounds with the, one call. That'd probably be my go-to for a novice. Get a slate call with, three different materials, couple strikers, have a box call. This is all if you're not familiar with the mouth call, and get a push button or something you can do in the short distances with less movement. Push button, a spin call, something easy to work. You're not going to call them in with that, but that's your like when they're closing the distance, you just need a quick little turkey sound to get them to V line to your decoy. Because if you get them to look at your decoy and they see it, if they're within 80 yards, they're coming. Like they're gonna come hot. There's not much you have to do from there. So less is more. Spend more time scouting. Spend more time closing the distance on your bird. Where you gotta crawl and get dirty. You know, use the terrain as your vantage point. Stay uphill or side hill. I try to always stay somewhat uphill of them, which sucks because you can't see them coming because they're small and you can never see them till they crest the hill. You'll just see a little head. I mean, they will just stick out over the hill and just peak. And I mean, that's the moment. If they catch any movement, they're gone. Very hard to see, especially in the PA woods that are just thick and nasty. But I mean, focus less on calling. In the off season, that's when you learn how to call. Now we're out of time. You got a week and that's pretty much it. As far as food sources, I think especially this year, it's just too there's just too widespread. It's too hard to
Oh
hunt.
yeah.
If you see turkeys constantly in the same location, that's not a bad thing. I mean, go for them. If you see them, that's just pattern, and that's not necessarily food source. That's just where they like to be. But I mean, they usually split up this time of year. They're not flocked up. The gobblers don't hang around with each other. They're in competition, and hens are your competition. So like, your hens coming in on your setup, you're gonna lose to the real thing. It's real tough to beat, but you got to get aggressive at that point. You got to close the gap. If you could scare the hen off, that'd be great. But usually they don't come in. If I get a hen behind me, I won't hesitate to scare a hen off. If I can, that's competition. But if something you can't, then you got to just take your decoy and go for it. And what's the worst that's going to happen? They're already going to be gone.
Yep.
But I've had a lot hang up at 100 yards, and the only thing you can do with that is crawl. It doesn't matter. You could be the best caller in the world. If he decides he's just going to pace back and forth until he sees a bird, a female, then that's what he's going to do. So he's already made up his mind, and you have to close the distance, with a decoy and be safe while doing it. Which it's just be aware of your surroundings and take your time. Don't stalk turkeys, man, guys. That's just not what we do. If it's not your birds gobbling and you didn't get them going, like don't be stalking other people's, gobbles and hen calls. That's just dangerous. Yeah, I mean they can shoot you coming in.
Yeah.
They
Real
can see
easy.
yeah, they can see movement. People are crazy. They get too excited and they just shoot a movement. So like if you hear a back and forth, it's just not stalking. Now if you locate it, it's gobbling solely to you. You don't hear anything else going on. That's when you move in. If there's so much commotion, you can just kind of hang back and let it play out. But I'd never advise going after any calling sequence, even if you think it's the real thing and it sounds amazing. It's bad news bears this time of year to stalk multiple calls because it's just very likely could be a hunter. I don't want to see anybody get shot, but
No, it's not worth it.
yeah. So I said small setup like that, slate call, box call, push button call. That's all relatively cheap. A good gun setup. Make sure you have camo covering your head to toe. It doesn't have to be expensive camo. The more patterns you have, anything to break up your outline. The leafy stuff's great. You can get cheap leafy stuff. I think as long as you break up your outline, you're good. And then the scouting is where most of the guys put in the time. I mean, I spend way more time scouting in the spring than I do hunting because you're looking for that bigger bird. Some guys, they want split beards or something cool they've seen, just playing out in the woods. So I think spend more time scouting. Don't need much gear and close that distance. Don't overcall. Just be patient. They sometimes hang up. That's the other thing I forgot. They will hang up sometimes or come in silent, but they'll take 20, 30 minutes to come in. It's so hard to be that patient, sit there and not call and not try to pull out your bag of tricks, but it's just time and time again that's failed me. I mean, I've done it. I'm not gonna lie, I've done it. You don't hear anything, and I know he's there. I'm like, oh, just one more. I got this. I'll do my purr thing, and they'll come running. Most likely, not. He already knows you're there. If he's been gobbling at you since daylight, he knows exactly where you are. He's coming. He'll look. you kind of got to just be patient. It's a bugger, especially with the older ones, man. It's nicer when you have a vantage point and you can see them trying to sneak in, but most likely not going to be the case. Yeah,
Well,
patience,
I,
patience.
I know it's definitely been helpful for me. So hopefully this is useful for some other people out there that are thinking about getting
Yeah,
into some turkey hunting and can glean some information from this.
yeah. Don't be afraid to try. I mean, get out there and just don't go out there calling your head off. That doesn't help anybody. That hurts your own cause. Use your locators, maybe a gobble too, but use your crow call and your owl call. And you got to locate near dark, whether it's early morning or, late at night. We do that with elk. You get out 3, 4 in the morning, the elk
Hmm.
are bugling their heads off. Same concept because they're safe in the dark. Turkeys are safe not in the dark, but in the trees. So, they're going to gobble their heads off. So if you don't see them at night, and what I normally do is scout similar areas and I'll get them gobbling. Like I'll go out tomorrow night, go for a ride in the evening, see if I can get them gobbling. And then I might leave them alone, but I'll come back to at least that somewhat of that area. Usually they're not far from where I originally had them gobbling every night, unless something blows them out of there. So scout, 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 close your distance, stay uphill, minimal gear, you can get her done. I mean, the guys killed them with push button calls, so it's doable.
All right, everybody. Well, thanks for watching, and we will see you next time.
Yep. Thanks for joining us. Take care.